In 1887, there was a bidding war going on between Salt Lake City and Ogden. Now, at stake was the Union Pacific Railroad. The chamber was organized to help win the bid. As the chamber celebrates 125 years, we are also just a few months shy of Union Pacific's 150th birthday. Now, my first guest represents Union Pacific on the Chamber Board of Governors. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dan Harbeck. How you doing, man? Good. Have a seat. Okay, Dan, we got a few questions. You and I are just going to chit-chat for a little bit, if that's cool.
Glad to do it.
I hope it's cool, because that's what's on the schedule. Good. So tell us about the relationship between the Chamber and Union Pacific.
Sure, and I was actually reading a little bit of history this morning, and it turns out during the Chamber's 50th anniversary, we actually had the chairman and president of the railroad at the time as the keynote speaker. So I apologize that you got me for the 125th, but if you look at what the history is with Union Pacific, it was actually about 1887, as you suggested, where the chamber was organized, but they were kind of withering at the time. And it actually took a battle, as you suggested, between Salt Lake City and Ogden in terms of where the railroad was going to locate some of our operations. And now it ultimately ended up in Ogden, but that was really a wake-up call for the chamber to think about, we need to work together, we need to collaborate in terms of how we attract business, not just to Salt Lake, but the state of Utah. And so UP has had a hand in the chamber's history from day one.
Now, how have the railroads contributed to the economic growth of Utah in the last 150 years?
Sure. Well, and you mentioned with our 150th anniversary coming up this year, Utah's really been with UP from day one. If you think about Abraham Lincoln, July 1, 1862, signed the Pacific Rail Act, creating Union Pacific. And it was 7 years after that the Central Pacific and the Union Pacific, after the Great Race, ended up in Promontory Summit, Utah, pounded the Golden Spike, and here we are today, marking Utah's place in history and UP's place in Utah. And so you think back in terms of what we've done since then, we've been shipping coal, minerals, metals ever since we first laid rail here, but that continues today. We ship a whole lot of copper, for example. Kennecott Utah Copper is a great company here in Utah. And if you've seen the new Utah Museum of Natural History, all that copper up on the side of the building, that actually moved on Union Pacific Railroad out east to be processed before being put up on the building there. Huh. And so there's a lot of good companies here in Utah.
That's great. Now, you've obviously moved a lot of stuff. Can you give us an idea of how much, how much fuel does it take to move all that stuff?
It takes a lot of fuel. And Union Pacific, we move millions of rail cars a year. And that takes a lot of fuel to do so. But having said that, freight rail, is one of the most environmentally friendly ways to ship freight. We can move 1 ton of freight 500 miles on 1 gallon of diesel. And one train is equal to taking about 300 trucks off the road. But that's not to say we don't have friends in the trucking industry. C.R. England, for example, a great company here in Utah, ships a fair amount of their freight on rail, on the refrigerated side. And so it's a great relationship that we have with the state, companies like C.R. England, Kennecott, that have made us work over time so well here in Utah.
Well, trains, I don't think they've changed a whole lot in the 150 years. I mean, it's a car with an engine. How have things changed since you guys got started?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of technology that people probably don't think about. I mean, think about the lights here, probably powered by coal. Well, that coal, and if you've been up Spanish Fork Canyon, you've seen the coal trains moving up, and maybe you've noticed there's a locomotive at the front of the train, maybe a locomotive at the back, and maybe even a locomotive in the middle. We call that distributed power units, where we distribute the power throughout the train, and that actually helps not only with just train dynamics, but also helps save fuel. That's a piece of technology. Think about the food we're eating tonight. That probably shipped at one point in a refrigerated boxcar. And we've got technology and GPS to track that. And then probably one more thing to think about is, say you're watching the news this morning on the TV you just bought from R.C. Willey. And that TV probably came on a shipping container from overseas, railed into our rail yard here in Salt Lake City, our intermodal facility, and now came to R.C. Willey and now into your home. And so those are just a few ways that technology has shaped all sorts of our business, from coal to technology.
So how much would you say, I'm going to go off script here just for a second, not that there is one, but no Googling up here. How much would you say, what percentage would you say of our lives are touched by things trains have transported?
Every part of our life. I mean, how many people came here in a car? Probably a few. Well, Union Pacific, we move 75% of the nation's vehicles west of the Mississippi. 3 out of 4 cars moved on Union Pacific, and actually in Salt Lake City, We actually have a distribution facility at 2100 South where we rail in the cars, then the haul away trucks taken to the dealerships. And so chances are with the food you're eating, the lights you're turning on, the TV you're watching, and the car you're driving, Union Pacific probably had a hand on that.
That's great. Now, you brought a couple of pictures here. Tell us about this first picture. I want to see
this.
We
did. And so this is Weber Canyon in the late 1860s. And just to give you an appreciation of the work at the time, they had 3 8-hour shifts, and the progress they made was about 12 inches a day, blasting with black powder. And so that gives you an appreciation. But then also, even today, but even back then, we had weather issues. I think we have another picture here.
Yeah, I think we have a second picture.
That shows this is the Sierra Nevada mountains. There's a train in there, if you can believe that. And they would have 5,000 people working just to shovel and keep the tracks clear. Fortunately, today we have a little bit better technology to keep those tracks clear. But it's been a time here in Utah and across the country.
Now, Union Pacific is still a Utah company, right?
We are, and people maybe don't know that. We're headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska, and we're the nation's largest freight railroad. We operate in 23 states, 30,000 miles of track, 42,000 employees, but we're incorporated here in Utah. And we've actually had our shareholders meeting across the street at Little America for well over 50 years.
That's great. So, yeah, definitely. So what do you have? I mean, you look great for 150. What do you have planned for that?
Well, I appreciate that. So what we've got going on this year, we are planning a community-wide celebration on Pioneer Day. Our 150th anniversary celebration is actually part of the Days of 47, one of their affiliated events, like the rodeo and everything associated with Days of 47. So on Pioneer Day, from 12 to 4, we're going to have the old historic Union Pacific Depot downtown. We're going to have a mini train for kids. We're going to have a locomotive simulator, exhibits inside, and I also hear, I guess, 2 more things. One, we're going to be presenting the city of Salt Lake with a Train Town USA designation to celebrate their history. And I also hear that we're ordering 10,000 cupcakes. And so...
What day is that?
Tuesday, July 24th from noon to 4.
Done.
So come and have 1, have 10, and we'd love to have you there.
How are you going to get them there?
Maybe a truck, we'll see.
All right. Dan Harbeck, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming in, Dan.
Appreciate it. You bet.